An iconic Second World War submachine gun being used on the Ukrainian frontline. Unbelievable? Maybe not.
In this war, we've heard a lot about the futuristic 21st century weapons such as hypersonic missiles, fiber optic kamikaze drones, and thermobaric bombs. But the majority of the equipment on the battlefield is really rather old. It's from the Soviet times. Both sides are using it. But occasionally we come across weapons that are even older than that.
Welcome to a two-part Frontline special. Our films usually focus on the current battlefield situation somewhere on Ukraine's 1,000 kilometers front. This one will be a little different. If you're interested in small arms, don't go away, because this is all about small arms, and not just any guns. In part one, we'll test fire and discuss two submachine guns from the 1940s, including the legendary MP40 Schmeiser. We'll do this with the help of our old friend Lt Oleh. He's still out on the Donbass front line launching rockets and other mayhem. And Jonathan Ferguson, keeper of firearms and artillery at the Royal Armouries in Leeds. He's one of the world's leading experts on 20th and 21st century small arms. In part two, we'll look at three examples of arguably the greatest family of weapons in history, the AK series. You might wonder what the link is between these remarkable guns. It's quite simple, yet extraordinary. They were all captured from Russian forces by Oleh's own unit. They're trophy weapons. Yes, that's right, a Schmeiser, the iconic German weapon that was designed by the Nazis and used extensively in the Second World War, has turned up on the battlefield in 2025. Not only that, we have the Special K, a submachine gun much beloved by the CIA, Special Forces in Vietnam, and even John Malkovich, in the film Retired Extremely Dangerous.
I am excited.
This is what we saw. This began over a coffee amid a snow shower in Kramatorsk, the city just behind the Donbass front line. Oleh told me he'd something interesting in the back of his pickup truck outside. That something was very interesting, if not extraordinary, certainly unexpected. A pristine MP40, aka the Schmeiser submachine gun. It was the weapon of choice of Nazi stormtroopers in 1,000 Second World War films and comic strips.
Вони використовували в бою?
Ні, ми зайшли в хату. Це шахтарство затонило. Там, де затонило, там, де вони були.
Ні, так воно ж підер був.
Вже, так. Коли ми туди-сюди ходили, зайшов і знайшов під пічку, то ми постріляємо.
Тобто це на наших складах внизу в шахтах було? Це ж в робочому стані?
Так.
Що?
В неділю постріляємо. 40-й рік, целі. На 100, на 200 метрів. Під глушитель.
Свій калібр це?
9-19 років. Амортизатор.
This one was manufactured in 1940, the year Nazi Germany conquered much of Western Europe and reached the shores of the English Channel.
Вещь. Я сам в шокі. Постріляємо, патрони є.
It was probably captured by the Red Army sometime between 1941 and 45, while still packed in Greece in its original factory box. In the following decades, it was likely to have been stored deep underground, in a chamber of a salt mine in Soledar near Bakhmut, which served as an arsenal for first the Soviet, then the Ukrainian militaries. The gun's recent history is complex and fascinating. Just before the salt mine was overrun by the Russians in 2023, the Ukrainian army attempted to blow up or bury what weapons it could not evacuate. But this Schmeiser seemed to have escaped destruction and was captured once again and given to a Russian separatist unit. When Oleh's unit captured a village from the separatist unit in southern Donetsk, they found the Schmeiser in a hut, so it changed hands for a third time. And here it is. Oleh wondered if we'd like to see him fire the Schmeiser, along with a number of other trophy weapons he captured from the Russians. Well, how could we refuse? We were driven out to a field, where there was a makeshift firing range, within earshot of the front line. The trophy weapons were produced.
Are these all actually trophies?
Yeah, they are. All of them.
And so the fun began. That wasn't meant to happen. Another member of Oleh's unit has a go, firing from the hip this time. until the 85-year-old weapon begins to jam. Oleh gives us his verdict on the Schmeiser. He seems impressed.
Майже немає віддачі і відчуваю, що він просто живий. Він тримає руку, от саму руку тримає. І великий плюс те, що в нього немає одиночного вогню, але без питань відсікаєш по одному вистрілу. Тобто скорострільність тут невелика, 600 пострілів на хвилину, але так зроблено, що можеш регулювати вогонь. 2-1, 2-1, 2-1. Я думаю, що цю зброю можна використовувати на сьогоднішній війні як зачистка приміщень. Ну, він був короткий, легенький, тобто я думаю, що цю зброю можна використовувати безпосередньо. Цікаво, що в МП-40 цеглик є і на 100, і на 200 метрів. Дуже цікавий запобіжник.
Very interesting
Запобіжник.
precaution, how to call this. Safety, yeah.
Також от ще один запобіжник. Для того, щоб вивести, треба здирку.
Can Oleh explain these
100 і 200 метрів.
for distance?
For distance, yes, for 100
Також є
and 200 meters.
місце для ПБС.
Now let's go 2,000 miles west, to the biggest and the best collection of small arms in the world, and get a more academic opinion on the Schmeiser.
Well, I'm here in one of the most extraordinary places I've been to. Behind me, you can see some of the 27,000 small arms that are in the collection here at the Royal Armouries, and I'm with the keeper of firearms and artillery, Jonathan Ferguson, who's very kindly agreed to talk trophy weapons that we've seen Oleg firing in Donetsk. First of all, Jonathan, could you tell us a little bit about the collection here and how you got to have quite so many guns in one place?
Certainly can. Well, we're fortunate that it's a combination of two of the best and biggest collections that were ever in the UK. The existing collection of firearms from the Royal Armouries, going back to very early times, as you might imagine, starting out at the Tower of London. So we have things from the 15th century, about 1400 is our earliest handheld firearm. We have two, actually, very greedy. And the Royal Armoury specialised up to maybe the end of the 19th century, maybe started to lose interest at that point historically. But in 2005, we acquired the Ministry of Defence Pattern Room collection, which was a sort of private museum in its own right, set up originally to govern manufacture of British firearms, but became this amazing reference collection. So we've combined the two here at Leeds into a pretty astonishing collection, I have to say.
How does it compare with other firearms collections around the world?
I usually I don't like to brag, but I think it's the best in the world.
Okay.
Partly because of that hybrid nature of coming from two of the best that existed in the UK. It's big, that's a big number, but more important is the span of time that it covers, the number of different nations that it encompasses.
Yeah, well, Jonathan doesn't like to brag, but Jonathan is one of the leading experts on firearms, particularly the 20th and 21st century. And this conversation, you could say, started in a street corner in Kramatorsk when I ran into my friend Lt Oleh of a special unit of Ukraine, who said, you want to see something I've got in my pickup? Of course I did. And he produced an MP40. Now, which is the classic, I think everybody has seen them in World War II films. It's like the classic German army, Nazi, would you call it a submachine gun or a machine pistol?
Submachine gun, well, they call it a machine pistol. This is where terminology gets a little confusing, but both.
But you have actually got a copy of the MP40 here in the collection.
We have a number of them, in fact, and the MP38 that came before it.
Okay.
But it really is an iconic design. One of the more recognisable, I would say, from history.
Could you tell us a little bit about the history and why it was special at the time?
Well, the Germans were ahead, certainly of the British, going into the Second World War. They had the Bergmann. They'd been the only nation to field a submachine gun firing a pistol class cartridge, in 1918. Other designs were out there, but they were the only people we know of to actually put it in the field. So they were ahead. So they had a lineage going already of submachine guns. And in 1938, the first version of this came out, functionally identical to the MP40 that People know, they might even know the designation, it's so famous, and just that silhouette. So it went from a big clunky, well, I think subjectively clunky, heavy metal bits and a wooden stock, traditional design, magazine sticking out the side, something that the Brits stuck with the Sten and even the Sterling later on. And they went back to the drawing board and came up with a completely different design. We've got this barrel sticking out the front. That keeps things light. So they've gone from a continuous tube that adds more metal up front where it isn't really needed. They've made that lighter and a bit simpler actually as well. They're making it substantially out of sheet steel, stamped and folded and pressed into shape. Once you've scaled up, that saves costs over machining and the traditional methods of manufacture. They invented this folding stock here. Push button and fold up. Our labels get in the way.
So it's quite compact, isn't it?
Can be very compact for storage, for carriage. You can shoot it in a pinch with the stock folded. Lots of things since have done that, but this was one of the earliest. This is what the original AK folding stock was copied from.
Oh, okay.
So this is really influential. It's also incredibly controllable. You know, I've been lucky enough to shoot this, and it kind of stays where it is and chugs away like a sewing machine, spitting bullets that way. It doesn't even have a semi-automatic capability.
Yes, no, Oleg was saying in Kramator. So what's the magazine? How much does it hold?
So we've got a 32 round magazine there. Pretty standard.
And what kind of range would you be using something like this?
Effective range is always a difficult measure to sort of quantify. We generally say with any submachine gun, 100 meters, maybe 200 meters on the outside. You know, if you're hoping to hit something, more than definitely going to hit something. But a skilled shot should have no problem at 100. It's really what they're designed for, you know, close up, automatic fire, or as the British tended to train for, you start with careful, deliberate aimed shots out to maybe 100, 150 perhaps. And then in an emergency, you've got the automatic fire function. This fires so slowly that 600 rounds per minute that you can just snatch off shots. Not really marksman level skill.
I think we saw that in the film that we shot in Donetsk. Oleg made the comment that he thought it would be pretty good. He would enjoy. He'd use it for house clearing, and you kind of raised an eyebrow.
It's interesting. I'm certainly not going to second guess someone with his experience and skill. You know, I don't have to use these things in anger. I suppose, you know, in my mind and probably a lot of others, this is just totally old hat, obsolete. No one's going to want to use it. Militias on both sides. Yes, of course, it's a viable firearm. It's capable. It uses a readily available round. That 9x19 or Parabellum Luger, 9mm Luger, it's named for the Luger pistol.
The Royal Armouries has 262 Luger pistols in its collection, by the way. And it's the same round?
Same round.
Right.
Invented in 1904 for the Luger, still in use today in your Glocks and everything else going. So you can easily keep this fed, albeit we saw some stoppages.
Yeah, there were some stoppages.
In that footage. But we don't know the state that this thing's in. They're designed to be maintained by the user and by an armourer. Things that are 80 years old are not necessarily going to function very well.
Going back those 80 years, what kind of impact did this have on the battlefield when it first came out, 1940, 39, 41?
Submachine guns are interesting. They spark our imagination. You know, we see them in the movies, we use them in games. We think it's a high firepower personal weapon. It's like a battle winner. Not really the case. You know, this is a pistol cartridge at the end of the day.
Right.
This is intended for, well, perhaps the most use they're going to see that's potentially going to change the course of a battle is if you're, depending on the nation, if your squad leader is carrying one of these. He might well be the first into an assault, kicking in doors, going into trenches, that kind of thing. And then his firepower could be decisive in that engagement, you know, at that level, 6 to 10 men, that kind of thing on each side. Mm. Beyond that, you really struggle to reach out and hit things, as discussed. So this is why most have standardized on rifle caliber, but reduced power rifle calibers. The Nazis had this, they then invented the assault rifle, broadly speaking, and a lot of nations followed suit, and that compromise is better, broadly speaking, than this. That's why I was interested in his opinion that this would be great for sort of clearing houses and things, but I absolutely defer to that. You know, there are still some security services, police forces, that kind of thing, who still use this class of weapon, a more modern version.
Yes.
And of course, it has no capability for optical sights. That's the other thing. No accessorization, which is such the modern trend.
The one that he had, I think, a silencer or something like that.
He mentions the capability for a silencer. He's referring to this barrel.
I don't know if he was right or not.
I don't think I can easily remove it, but this unscrews if you can get your nail onto it. And there was actually, it's little known, but there was a silencer invented for this thing, or a suppressor if you prefer. Very little used.
Were you surprised to see it produced out of the back of a pickup truck in Ukraine in 2025?
Yes and no. I've done enough sort of open source intelligence type research to see all sorts of crazy stuff show up in all sorts of crazy places. I don't think I'd yet seen an MP40 in Ukraine, either 2014 or 2022. So it still did surprise me, but it probably shouldn't. You know, these things, although they may not work fully to their full potential at this point, they're out there in their millions, you know, they were originally. And so they will show up. If people have packed them in Greece or, you know, the Russians showed at one point some underground facility absolutely packed with American Lend-Lease Thompson submachine guns in pristine condition.
I think
they are out there.
From what Oleg said, that it might have been one of these underground bunkers that have been there for decades that he actually took the MP40 from, which had been under the control of the separatists.
So you're going to get, in that scenario, you're going to get everything from packed in grease like the day it was made, clean off the grease, give it a bit of oiling and it's going to run, to they haven't been put in preservative and they are rusting to hell and they won't work. And then the middle, which is what we saw.
You were talking about how the Germans developed the assault rifle towards the end of the war. Its kind of active mass production service life would have ended 1945?
That's the thing about it. For all it's so famous, it doesn't proliferate anything like, well, certainly nothing on the order of the AK, for example. It's a relatively short service life, curtailed by events. You know, it would have gone on to be more popular, and other nations did end up with them. You know, all of these Second World War weapons have a sort of tail legacy service life out there, but it didn't become the sort of runaway success that it might have done, because there was, although the assault rifle comes along in, well, depending on where you draw the line, 44, not everyone is convinced by any means, and it's decades. There are decades of submachine gun use in the Cold War, you know, throughout Vietnam, up to the Gulf War. You know, the Brits and the Americans were both had tank crews equipped with submachine guns in the Gulf War. So it takes a long time for that concept to take hold. Some nations never go with it, and they stick with their full power rifles, which means you do need something like this to go along with it for paratroopers, vehicle drivers, officers, maybe your squad leaders.
In January, we were with an armour recovery team. They were all a three-man crew. Their job was to go and pull tanks that had been knocked out of the front line. They were all carrying submachine guns, compact.
Yep. They still have as a personal defence weapon, that's one of the niches that these things still fill. I have anecdotally heard of the PPSH, the Papasha 41 Russian submachine gun, seeing at least some use with Ukrainian armoured vehicle crews for that reason. And again, probably because they were very well preserved. And that's compared to this, blistering rate of fire and a higher capacity magazine, so you can why they would want it as well. We shouldn't overlook the fact that some of these things are going to be acquired because they're cool.
Yes.
And they're iconic. Same reason that the people watching might know about them and think they're interesting. That applies to soldiers as well.
I think this certainly applied to Oleg in this case. Before we end, Jonathan explains how the MP40 wrongly acquired its commonly used nickname.
Jonathan, the formal name of this weapon is the MP40, but everybody calls it the Schmeiser. Why is that?
Nicknames are a funny thing. Someone coins one and it sticks because it sounds cool, or it somehow speaks to something in people's heads and it spreads like a meme, you know. And Spandau and Schmeiser, you're never getting that, you know, the veterans never gave up on calling every machine gun a Spandau and every submachine gun a Schmeiser. Schmeiser stuck with the MP40 sort of post-war because it was the iconic Second World War German machine gun, but it originates from the designer of the previous range of submachine guns. So it's an inventor's name, Hugo Schmeiser, but Hugo Schmeiser didn't invent this. And unlike the so-called Spandau MG34, MG42, where some of them had Spandau written on them, so you'd be forgiven for thinking, this is a Spandau, it's written on it. That didn't happen here. So it's a little bit like how every vacuum cleaner suddenly became a Hoover, or at least in the UK it did, even though your Hoover's a Dyson. It's a very similar kind of miscategorization, but there's no going away from it. But it sounds purposeful, it sounds like you're holding the thing somehow. So it works as a name, and I would never tell a veteran to not call it a Schmeiser.
Let's go back to Donbass, where Oleg is preparing to fire our second World War II era submachine gun. This is the Gustaf M45, also known as the Special K. It's a Swedish gun that was designed during the Second World War and used around the world for decades afterwards. Regular Frontline viewers will recall that this is not the first time we've come across a Special K in Ukraine. The other one was in the Kupiansk sector in January last year. The Ukrainian military had given it to a 41st Brigade officer called Kruger. He was not very impressed by being asked to fight a 21st century war with what he called a museum piece. But what do Oleg and Jonathan think? Oleg goes first.
Я это сломал, блин. Вообще, слушай.
And here's his verdict on the Special K.
Також зброя доволі зручна. Зручна. Вага дозволяє хорошо посилюватись. Також ця зброя може використовуватись на зачистках приміщень елементарно. Зручний приклад. Да. Як на зброю, якій 80 років, чи скільки їй? Якого він року? Кость?
45.
Ну так, да. Доволі таки серйозна зброя. Легше.
Back to Leeds, where Jonathan is also obviously a fan.
And the interesting story, I was with a 41st Brigade unit in January last year, and one of the officers said, "You've got to see the sort of crap that they give us to defend our country with." And he went to the wardrobe in an abandoned cottage and he pulled down a Carl Gustaf and he said, "Look at this museum piece." And then he took it out to the farmyard and began firing it in the hillside. And it was, I think the rate of fire was possibly faster than the MP40, but
Perhaps a little.
Yeah, a little. Certainly this, could you tell us a little bit about this? Because this is a Swedish gun.
Yes. Yeah, the contrast in opinions there is fascinating, because really, all things being equal, I would expect people to settle for this and not bother with that.
Yeah.
Because this is a sort of product improved version of that, really. It's the Model 45, M45 Swedish, also known as Carl Gustaf. That's a little misleading though, because it doesn't come into service until the post-war years.
Right.
So it's like the British Sterling. It's a World War II design put into service immediately post-war, pretty much. And it takes on some of the lessons learned previously, and shares some of the features of the MP40. It has the same idea of a folding buttstock. But it's a bit more agricultural, admittedly. I can see why a young guy might think that's quite Gucci, and that this is a bit ropey, or especially depending on condition.
Well, I have to say that Oleg preferred this to that, to the Schmeiser.
That makes sense. Yeah, but the other chap who thinks it's crap is intriguing.
I don't think he had the...
He might have thought that was crap too.
He didn't have the option of the MP40.
No. To give you an idea of its post-war legacy, now, of course, the MP40 being very much on the losing side of the Second World War, there are fewer options for it to make it out there and become famous after the war. So we know it from the Second World War, primarily. This thing, firstly coming into service post-war, but also coming into the hands of the Americans in particular, the CIA operators in Vietnam, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, MACV, SOG, who are largely US Army Special Forces as well, they all really appreciated this thing.
They were carrying this?
Absolutely, yeah, by preference in many cases. Now, they were using all sorts in Vietnam, don't get me wrong, but this developed a real reputation as the ideal submachine gun. They thought it was reliable, again, compact. None of these things are lightweight because the way they work requires a great big heavy steel bolt, which necessarily keeps them a bit heavy.
Yeah.
But for jungle fighting, they absolutely loved it. They had a CIA developed suppressed silenced version as well, which was invaluable in some niche cases. Broadly speaking, once they had access to compact AR-15s, they used those. But for a while and for niche applications, they rated these. The CIA, it's even referenced in a movie.
Which movie is that?
Red, Retired, Extremely Dangerous.
I don't know that
The
one.
Swedish K is specifically mentioned, which is one of these pop culture. Someone's picked it up somewhere from a book or a magazine, and they put it into the movie. And this retired.
The Bruce Willis one, right?
Yes, Malkovich. So John Malkovich's character is this, deadly retired CIA killer, essentially. And he rates this thing, calls it out by its American nickname, the Swedish K. The K coming from Kulspruta, forgive my language, but machine pistol in Swedish.
Okay. The Swedish K, I didn't think we'd be referencing John Malkovich.
There's a pop culture reference for everything.
No, I like it. In terms of its performance, you say it's a development, obviously, inspired by the MP40.
I would say so.
How much of an improvement in terms of range, rate of fire would that have? Not much.
I mean, not really. Yeah. No, I think it's more that I think if they'd had MP40s available in quantity, they'd have been raving just as much about that, I think. I don't think there's anything intrinsic about it that makes it better. Similar kind of weight, similar overall size. Yeah, there's no real advantage over this. This is closer in spirit to the Sten gun,
right?
Being a sort of simple tube with some parts attached to it. A lot cheaper per gun to buy than the MP40 if someone had carried on making.
But in terms, as I understand it, these Carl Gustafs, they were used in many countries for several decades. I mean, obviously, the Schmeiser MP40 was on the losing side, which was bad for business. But this was produced in huge quantities.
Yes, the Swedes were making it, and it was able to proliferate by virtue of not being in an occupied country where arms manufacture was going to be tightly controlled. But yeah, it's very much in the same ballpark, I would say.
So that's the Schmeiser and the Special K, both still on the battlefield 80 years after they were first used. It's a little like seeing a Spitfire or Mustang in combat over Donbass against Shahed drones. But Oleg has 3 more trophy weapons. In part 2 of this Frontline special, we'll be looking at the family of assault rifles that was influenced by these submachine guns, but ultimately superseded them to become the most famous gun in the world.
Ну так.